I do remember like when we were writing it, the only request Paul had for doing the show was that after that episode that Lisa remain a vegetarian, that we don't just throw it away the next episode. And to this day, we're up to like season 33 and she's still a vegetarian.
These youngsters from Liverpool, England.
The significance is that the Beatles have held this title for 8 years.
Hello, I'm Jack, and you're listening to the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast, an interview show about the Beatles' influence in the past, present, and future across the universe and across generations. Welcome back to Here, There, and Everywhere. It's my pleasure to welcome onto the show Mike Scully. Mike is a television writer and producer who is known for his work as executive producer and showrunner of The Simpsons. Mike's won 3 primetime Emmy Awards for his work on the show and also co-wrote the Simpsons movie. He's worked on shows like Everybody Loves Raymond and Parks and Rec. Mike also co-developed a new show, Duncanville, with his wife Julie and Amy Poehler. Mike's work in these shows is a staple in American pop culture, just like how the Beatles are a staple in music history. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe if you're not already, and here's the podcast. Mike, thank you so much for coming on. It's an honor to talk to you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I got to say, Jack Lawless, you got a real rock and roll name there. So I like that.
Thank you. Mike, can you walk us through how you grew up and how you got involved with writing?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, growing up, I grew up in the 60s. I was born in 1956. So, TV was a big part of my childhood, endless hours in front of the TV, watching all kinds of, comedies that had a huge impact on me, like the Dick Van Dyke Show and I Love Lucy and Mary Tyler Moore, like going right into the 70s. But, also combined with that, with the explosion of rock in the 60s, there was also music shows. They kept trying to figure out in TV how to get music to work on TV shows. So I watched, I got to see a lot of, rock bands on TV. Was kind of the first place you would get to see them, whether it was, obviously like Ed Sullivan, but there were shows like there was a show named Hullabaloo and Shindig and like these kind of shows with girls dancing in go-go cages and the bands would come out. It was kind of like American Bandstand but more rock oriented. So that those two things kind of combined, the love of TV comedy and the love of music kind of overlapped for me.
And what was the first time you heard the Beatles?
My first memory of them is like many people my age, was the Ed Sullivan Show. That first time in 1964, I was like 8 years old, and my family was all in front of the TV. And I'll never forget my dad. My dad just hated them the second he saw them. As soon as they were on camera, I'll never forget. It's just one of those childhood memories that's so embedded in my head. It's just my dad, like they started singing, the crowd was screaming, and my dad's like, Jesus Christ, get a load of these fucking assholes. And that was my first time seeing the Beatles. And I think my dad hating it just made me enjoy it even more, was to see how much it bugged him. My mother, on the other hand, my mom was super cool, and like she got it right away. She loved them. She loved the suits. She loved the harmonies. Like she got the excitement. The only thing she would say is, "I don't like it when they scream," but but she was into it right away, and I think she loved seeing how much I loved it.
And what was it about them that captivated you?
Oh man, it's first of all, we had never seen anything like that before. That sound, I mean, I didn't grow up. I mean, Elvis was obviously around in the 50s and stuff, but as I was kind of too young to appreciate that. And with the Beatles, like I said, I was 8 years old. Maybe like a little on the close side of too young, but I still like felt something. Like it just felt so cool and exciting, and I loved the sound, and I don't know, it felt like it was ours, like, oh, this is being done for my entertainment and me and my friends. This is strictly for us to enjoy. And, it was a sound unlike anything we had ever heard come out of our TVs before.
Yeah, I think there's something special about the Beatles where like each generation that comes along can kind of identify with them and kind of claim them as their own.
Yeah, there was something I'm thinking back to that. Even like I'll go back and just watch old clips of them playing all the time. And there's something about it that just makes you feel good. I think part of it is they always looked like when they were playing live, they looked like they were having a great time. They smiled, and they looked like they were having fun. And that came through the screen to me. And to this day, I will judge bands like if a band is on stage and they look kind of dour or like they're doing me a favor by being there, I'm immediately like, I'm out.
Right. Yeah, a lot of them look like they just don't want to be there.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Huge difference between now and then.
Yeah, so just the whole sense of fun that surrounded the Beatles, and then also at that time, once they were on at Sullivan, I mean, they were doing a lot of press. So we were seeing them on TV a lot, doing press conferences, like getting off the plane at JFK. But in the press conferences, they were so funny and like very quick witted, and like the jokes were like really good.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, kind of across the board. All four of them were capable of being funny in their own way, and which just kind of blew me away. Like even now, I have to like think back, and I have to remind myself they were kids.
Right. Yeah. I think George Harrison was like 20 years old when they landed in America.
Yeah, yeah, it's nuts, and to be besieged, by press and fans and a whole country, basically, and they just held their own with the press. They were likable and funny and charming and glib. They were kind of like, they were the whole package, and I just fell 100% for it.
And the press didn't know it hit them either. They were kind of confused at like the humor that they were getting back from the Beatles too, which was I thought was great. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of the press, when I see some of those clips, some of the guys said that they look like they were like the age of my dad, like they were like kind of ready to hate them or ready for them to be stupid or inarticulate. And I think they caught them off guard by being so sharp and funny.
For sure, absolutely. I completely agree. Did they influence your life in any way aside from just liking their music?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, as I got older, like definitely like clothes and hair, and like that was the beginning of my haircut fights with my father was the Beatles. Like and, all my friends, we all just wanted to grow our hair. And but I would say, and I had posters up of them. I had a great black and white one outside Abbey Road, and I remember one that was like a blow up of a Life magazine cover in my room. And but also seeing the movie Hard Day's Night the first time, that definitely, like, there was an intersect for me of music and comedy coming together in one place of like, oh wow, this can be funny in addition to being great music. This they can actually like tell a story in a movie and I'm laughing out loud at it. And then obviously Hard Day's Night would go on to influence lots of movies, and eventually, 20 or 15 years later, kind of, begat MTV, is really an offshoot of Hard Day's Night. And let's see, Hard Day's Night was 65. And then in like 1966 or 67, we had the Monkees on TV
Right.
there, which was very definitely influenced by, some TV executives said, hey, those Beatles seem to be hot. We should do something like that,
Yeah. I think
And
they call them the prefab four.
exactly, yeah, yeah. That actually wound up being my first live concert. What in 1967, I saw the Monkees live.
Oh, that's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, so that was like the closest for me at that time to of seeing the Beatles.
Have you ever seen the Beatles live?
No, I never saw the Beatles play live. I've seen Paul and Ringo play. I think I saw George with somebody he like sat in on something with somebody. But yeah, Paul I've seen a couple of times, and Ringo over the years doing his the All Star Band shows. But no, no, never. By the time they broke up, I was like 14, I think, when they split up. That's the other thing that always amazes me is how much they packed into like a really like short span of time, like 7 years, the amount of great music, and the Hard Day's Night and Help and even the movie Let It Be, which I was glad to see is kind of like is rewritten in my head now thanks to the Get Back documentary, because I remember going to see that they were kind of selling it to kids. Like I said, I was 13 or 13, I think, and they were kind of selling it just like Hard Day's Night or Help. Like the ads were like, those wacky mop tops are at it again, because they knew we would all go, and
Right.
then you get in there and it's just like the most depressing movie.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's like
and
NyQuil.
yeah, yeah, and it's like, why aren't they running around in fast motion and and yelling, "Hey, Mister, give us our ball back"?
Being such a huge Beatles fan, what was it like working on The Simpsons, where there are just loads of Beatles references throughout the entire show?
Yeah,
And you actually produced an episode where Paul McCartney was a guest. Did you get to meet him?
I did not get to meet him. Actually, the guy who was running the show at the time, his name is David Merkin, and he was the one who actually hired me for The Simpsons. Dave is like super Beatles fan, and he got to go to Paul's house, I believe in Scotland, and record Paul at Paul's home studio.
Oh, so that's where that happened. Okay.
Yeah, you should have Dave on the show sometime. I don't want to tell his stories, but
For sure,
he's
yeah.
got some great ones.
Oh, that's cool. I've always imagined Paul actually being on top of the Quickie Mart in that garden.
Yeah.
Did not know
Yeah.
that.
And yeah, and that's where the episode was. I do remember like when we were writing it, the only request Paul had for doing the show, because we pay like union scale to all the guests. They all make the same money. You get like whatever the union scale is, plus a T-shirt with the Simpsons on it, and that's your payment. So nobody does it for the money. But his one request was that after that episode, that Lisa remain a vegetarian,
Oh, wow.
that we don't just throw it away the next episode. And so to this day, I mean, that was season 5 or 6. And to this day, we're up to like season 33, and she's still a vegetarian.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Did you work with other Beatles fans? Because aside from that episode with Paul, George and Ringo made appearances on The Simpsons as well, and there were countless homages to the Beatles too.
Yeah, George and Ringo were on the show before I got there. I got there near the end of season 4, beginning of season 5. But yeah, there's a lot of Beatles fans, and most of the writing staff. I mean, it's pretty hard to to find somebody particularly that's not a Beatles fan. I mean, everybody that was on the staff when the show started, like George Meyer and Al Jean and Mike Reese and Conan, everybody's Beatles fan. So we're always happy to do a reference, and the references stand the test of time too.
Yeah, they really do.
Yeah, it's not one of those kind of pop culture jokes where you're worried that a year later people won't know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Speaking about longevity, what do you think it is about the Beatles that allows them to stand the test of time for so long?
oh man, I think because it was so much more than just like a rock group. I mean, it really was like a movement or like I said, it was that thing that was ours. It belonged to my generation, and then instead of like keeping it for ourselves, like as we got older, we were passing it down to our either younger brothers and sisters, and then eventually you're passing it down to your kids, and and I think the bottom line of it is the songs are so great. I mean, if the songs weren't great, regardless of how, funny they were, or all that stuff. If the songs didn't stand the test of time, I don't think they would, last the way they have. But the songs are amazing. I never feel like I'm like listening to an oldie when I'm listening to the Beatles. I just feel like I'm listening to rock music.
Yeah, it's so contemporary.
Yeah, yeah. And my wife, plays the piano, Julie, and she's got this, Beatles songbook with all the music, and she was like blown away. She was, these songs are so complicated musically. Like, even
Yeah,
though they make them sound simple, but they're, a lot of them are very intricate and complicated in their arrangements. And once again, they were doing this all in their 20s.
blows me away.
Yeah, yeah, and with no formal musical training.
I know. I always compare myself to the Beatles because I just turned 25, and I always think like on my birthday I'm like, all right, when John was 25, he already made Rubber Soul, he already did Revolver, he already did all this stuff, and like, what am I doing? But and then even George, I think George was 25 in the Get Back documentary, which is insane.
Yeah, it really is. Because, yeah, same thing. I think back to me, in my 20s, and really, like, what I was doing with my life. And, it's crazy of how much, by the time of the Get Back documentary, how much they had already accomplished, and they hadn't, imploded or like self-destructed or like, and I can't imagine the pressure cooker they lived in, you know?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, they're kind of, it prepared, somewhat, I think, other bands to come for what happens when you get famous, but they probably had nothing to compare it to, maybe except Elvis, I guess, that kind of
Right.
mania, you know.
Yeah, I think Elvis was like the only huge sensation before the Beatles, and then maybe before Elvis it was like the the presidents or something. I don't know who was big in that kind of sense.
Yeah, well, yeah, Lincoln used to get tons of screaming girls. I remember that.
Right.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah, yeah. He'd do that Gettysburg Address. The girls would go nuts.
I can imagine now.
It's funny. I'm just, as I'm talking to you, I'm suddenly remembering I have actually seen Paul a couple of times in person, not playing. And one time was in a restaurant and in the lobby of a restaurant in LA. This was just a few years ago. It was like lunchtime, and I was supposed to meet a friend there, and the lobby was very crowded around the where the host is. And I turned, and like literally 6 inches from my face, there's this face that's like so recognizable. I'm like, who's that? And then he goes, and he was, we were looking right into each other's eyes because there was nowhere else to really look. And he just was like, oh, hey man, how's it going? Uh, and I
Wow.
think he must have seen the crazed look in my eye of realizing that's Paul McCartney, because I'm sure he's used to that. And I think he's very good at, I think he knows how to kind of disarm people and try to calm them
Yeah.
down.
Right.
And yeah, yeah, and then he was, gone, off to have lunch himself. So that was fun. And then once, a few years ago, 2015, I went to see a taping at SNL, Saturday Night Live, and then after the show, they have an after party. And Amy Poehler, who I've worked with a few times, was co-hosting the show and was nice enough to get my wife and I into the show and the party. Bruce Springsteen was the musical guest on the show, but Paul joined him at the end, and they sang "Santa Claus is Coming to Town."
So
And so then
awesome.
at the party afterward, like, it was crazy. There was one table of people, and I bumped into a couple of writer friends of mine who happened to be there, and we could hardly look at this one table because at the table was Paul, Springsteen, Steve Van Zandt, Steven Spielberg, Lauren Michael. It was like so much power at one table.
What?
We were like, all of us like, we can't even look over there.
Wow. I wonder what their conversation must have been like at that table. What were they talking about?
Oh God, man, they're probably just, they probably talk about the same shit everybody does. Like, how long do I
Right.
have to stay at this party?
Have you seen the Get Back documentary?
Oh yeah, Oh yeah, yeah. That was a great week for me. That Thanksgiving week was because there was a Springsteen release of a concert he did in 1979 at Madison Square Garden, which which is incredible. And then like a couple days later, Get Back started playing. So that week I was just like glued into the TV. But yeah, the Get Back thing was it was just so good. And like I said, it completely rewrote my memory of sitting in the theater watching Let It Be the first time around. It was so much fun to see them having fun together, making each other laugh. One of my favorite moments is when Paul and John, they kind of sing this version of The Two of Us with their teeth clenched, and they're just kind of
Right.
singing
Yeah.
through the and but they don't just do it for like one verse. They do the entire song that way. And once again, the amount of pressure they were under, you learned at the beginning of the movie that they basically got 2.5 weeks to write and record these songs and come up with a concept for a TV special, which is just insane. And the fact that they were still able to have that much fun with each other. I mean, granted, yes, the moments of tension are there, but I think any band would probably tell you, yeah, that shit happens. Like you get frustrated or you have differences of opinion about a certain song, and but to watch that moment. I mean, I think the moment that kind of got everybody where they happen to have that overhead camera, and Paul is like kind of noodling around with, and you start to recognize it's the riff of Get Back. You start to
Yeah.
hear him playing it, and he's just kind of like noodling around. And I guess they said he was just waiting for John because John was late. Um, and then like he's starting it, and like you're sitting there going, "Don't stop, man! Don't give up on this."
Yeah,
This
you
is
want to
gonna
be
be.
there telling them what the lyrics should really be.
Oh my god! And just to see like they're just throwing ideas around and changing words, randomly and trying out different things, and nothing's kind of set in stone. And I love when John was given George the advice on, for something, because George couldn't was trying to write the lyrics to something, and he had like something in the way she moves attracts me like, and he couldn't figure out. And John's like, just say anything, say like attracts me like a pomegranate or attracts me like a something else.
Yeah.
He's like, just keep going, don't stop yourself and get hung up on the words.
Man, it was just so incredible seeing the bond they all had and the kind of magic that went on behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, well, the name of your podcast, I read recently that Paul had written Here, There, and Everywhere once again while waiting for John for something.
No,
He,
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I think I read that.
apparently
He
he
was
was like at John's house or like in his backyard, and like John was late. So and then so Paul writes Here, There, and Everywhere while he's waiting.
it's truly incredible.
Yeah. So it was fun to see like what they each brought individually, but it was also fun to see them when they clicked as a group, to see the pieces come together and to see them get excited, and they were like I mean they were all funny. I mean, it was weird at that stage because they were only 6 years past like the Ed Sullivan Show, but like Paul had the beard, and their looks had
Oh
all
yeah.
changed so much because I think
Yeah.
you know, they had lived, 25 years in 6 years, I think. But also, just like the jokes that got thrown around, Ringo just floors me because Ringo has a great comedy delivery. He's very dry, very deadpan.
Yeah, I mean their humor is incredible. When they're sitting there joking around, I feel like I'm in the room and they're my friends because that's the way my friends do joke around. And I feel like their humor is very contemporary too. I mean, I don't know if jokes get lost in translation through different generations, but I feel like a lot of their jokes and their humor is very contemporary and it makes me laugh today.
Oh, totally, totally. And I've talked to some of my friends who also watched it, and just what you learn kind of about the creative process from watching these four guys create these classic songs, and the work that went into it, the trial and error, the stuff they started but didn't finish, and that kind of stuff that that everyone goes through if you're trying to do anything creative. And then the stuff they would do just to kind of release the tension or to clear their heads, just singing like old, like 50s songs, and songs they grew up with, and just to kind of have fun, and I think get the cobwebs out of their head before they moved on to the next thing, or shake off whatever it was they were working on. But it was really kind of fascinating. And to hear that moment in the very beginning, like it might be in the first half hour, when they're talking about the idea for the TV special, and one of the producers or the director keeps pitching this very exotic torchlit concert in Egypt by the pyramids or something. He's like this very elaborate thing, and Paul just casually says that it should be something like where we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, like we should be somewhere we're not supposed to be. He goes, and like maybe like where, and I think he might even say like like where the cops could like throw us out, or he's just kicking around ideas, and we're watching it all these years later going, holy shit, that's going to be the rooftop concert. That's
Yeah, I know.
and they're all just like pitching ideas of like, I don't know, maybe it could be this, maybe it could be that. And anytime you're doing anything creative, like if we're writing TV, that's so much of the process is kind of, I don't know, maybe it could be Bart does it. So,
Right.
and then you just kind of see if anything clicks. And it's funny how quickly they gloss over Paul's idea at that time. And I don't even know if at the end of it, when they come up with the idea of just going up on the roof, I'm not even sure that Paul remembered that he had said that thing a couple weeks earlier about going somewhere they shouldn't go, or being
Right.
somewhere they shouldn't be. I was wondering, like, because he never said like, yeah, that's what I was talking about a couple weeks ago, or just. I think it might have just kind of like, it may have, he may have just thrown out something that seems like a funny idea to him at the time. And it's a great thing that documentary does is it makes you, like in any like movie or TV show, you're always looking for like, what are the stakes of this story?
Mhm.
Like if the person doesn't do this, what's going to happen to so and so, or what'll happen to them if they don't accomplish this? And Get Back, even though everyone knows the rooftop concert happened and it's on film and we've seen it,
Right.
you get so caught up watching the movie. There were periods like where they were like kind of abandoning different ideas. Like, it's like, I don't know if this concert's going to happen. It's
Yeah.
like, then I have to remind myself, no, it does. You've seen it.
Yeah, it's a very Back to the Future Part 2 kind of feeling where you're
Yeah.
like watching it from backstage and you know what's going to happen because it just happened, but
Yeah.
you don't want to mess anything. I was sitting there like holding my breath because I didn't want to mess anything, like the butterfly effect or something.
Yes. Oh, totally. It's an amazing. If anybody hasn't seen it by now, I know some people I've told like, all right, it's 8 hours long, and I can see their eyes just glazing over. But it's so worth it. You can break it up, and I've told people like, watch an hour a night or watch 2 hours, and you
Right.
don't have to. There's no obligation to complete it, in one day or anything.
Right.
But I do think it's better watched as close together as possible, because you kind of you're following their little story along, while they're trying to, put this album together. It's also one thing too that reminded me a lot of TV. Like a lot of times, like we're working on a story and we just kind of lose enthusiasm for the story and we'll throw it out and we won't think about it like for a few years. We'll just like forget about it and we do other things. And then eventually you come around like, hey, remember like someday when you're coming up with nothing and you're running out of time and you're like, what was that thing we had a couple of years ago? And and there's spots in there where they're like worried that they're not coming up with enough songs. And Paul and John start digging through their old songbooks.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit, the Beatles did it too.
So their creative process was really similar to your creative process as well?
I think it's for a lot of people's, at least I mean, I can only speak to my experience, but I've been in TV now for over 30 years. and you kind of like file away a lot of ideas, that you don't, or and then sometimes dig them out later, or stuff like that, or for whatever reason it sticks in the back of your head. Or I used to jot notes down on like little post-its and stick them in things, or you'd have a desk drawer just full of these post-its, and then try with like one word on it, and you try to remember what did that mean. And now
Right.
you keep files like on your computers, and of ideas like that, just random stray thoughts that you don't know what to do with at the time, but feels like it could be something someday.
Right.
There's a famous one on the board that was on the board in the Simpsons writers room for, oh my God, like 20 years. It was a white index card tacked to the board, and the card was up there so many years, it actually yellowed. It turned yellow from the sun hitting it, and it just said fried cake on it. And like and we felt it was important enough to put on the board, so we never forgot it. And then over the years, like, what's fried? People would come into the room and they go, "What's fried cake?" Like, we don't remember, but it's really important, and it'll come back to us someday.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, and speaking of Hard Day's Night and the Simpsons and kind of that overlap of in music, there's an episode of The Simpsons. I believe it's called "The Old Man and the Sea Student." It was actually written by Julie Thacker, my wife, and there's a part in it. It's we wanted to do a parody of Hard Day's Night in the middle of the show. That scene where the Beatles have been trapped in the TV studio all day rehearsing and trying to find Paul's grandfather and stuff like that. And then they finally kind of break out of the studio, and they just take off to go have some fun together. And so they kind of burst out of the studio door, and Can't Buy Me Love is playing. And you see them kind of running through a park. And there's like a lot of the video kind of stuff that became in videos on MTV. But anyway, so we wanted to kind of capture that. They're like jumping in the air in slow motion. And in our story on The Simpsons, Grandpa is feeling trapped at the retirement castle. So he and all his like elderly friends bust out of the place, and the same spot. We start with "Can't Buy Me Love." Unfortunately, we couldn't afford the master recording of "Can't Buy Me Love" because master recordings of the Beatles are very expensive to license. But because Paul McCartney is a fan of this band NRBQ, who I happen to be friends with, it's the New Rhythm and Blues Quartet. We got permission to have NRBQ record a version of "Can't Buy Me Love," and that's what appears in the episode of The Simpsons. And the guys in NRBQ were great. They even recorded. They were explaining to me the guitar solo, like from the Beatles' original recording. You hear like a little echo on the guitar, like in the distance. There's this kind of now, and you hear about. And they said what that was in the original recording was, I guess they had recorded over the tape something like so many times that there was like part of an old recording still there, or this is how the musicians were explaining it to me. And that
Wow.
it gave this kind of cool little like distant echo effect that the Beatles were so left in. So when NRBQ recorded, they tried to copy that sound to get it in there. So we were supposed to make sure that it didn't sound like the Beatles, so people weren't mistaking it for the master. But you can tell that it's not them. But the guys did a great job of covering it for us. And at the end of the show, in the credits, we kind of copied the Hard Day's Night album cover with pictures of Homer, Marge, Bart, and Lisa on there. And then we, reprised, whatever the correct pronunciation is, the song over our closing credits. So that was a way that we definitely used the Beatles on The Simpsons.
It's so cool. And I think that was that album called like Bart's Day Night. I think it said it
Oh
on the
yes,
album.
you're right. I forgot that. Yeah, we did put a title on it, "A Bart's Day Night." Yeah, you're right.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I remember watching that. I think I must have been watching a rerun of that episode when I was younger, because they every must have been like 2010 or 2012 where they showed every Simpsons episode in order
Oh
on
yeah,
Channel
yeah.
Fox, and I was watching that, and that was when I was starting to get into the Beatles, and I remember hearing "Can't Buy Me Love," but I realized it wasn't by the Beatles. Um, but I was like, this version's actually pretty good. I did not know NRBQ back then, but after hearing your story, I'm like, oh, this all comes full circle. That's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. No, they did a really cool job. I mean, there's versions of it on YouTube that I've seen, but the for some reason the audio is sped up. Whoever
Hmm.
put the clip up, the audio is sped up, so the band sounds a little weird. The recording, because I'm listening to it, this is going too fast. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, now like on Disney Plus, you can see all the episodes. So it's you get the full version. That marathon, God, that it reminded me when you said that we didn't know what was going to happen when that marathon aired. I think it was to launch the FXX channel. They were launching
Hmm.
the channel and they wanted to do something big to promote it. And they came up with this idea of a Simpsons marathon, like every episode in order for like 12 days straight, 24 hours a day. And
Yeah.
we were very nervous about it. We're like, oh man, this like because of the online, we thought, oh man, they're gonna start hammering us and telling us like when we should have canceled the show and stuff like that. But surprisingly, it got kind of this like outpouring of love. I was hearing on Twitter from like dads who were like in their late 30s maybe, who were watching at the marathon with their like 8-year-old kids because they had remembered watching these episodes when they were kids and now they were watching them with their kids or something.
Oh,
So it
that's
was,
so cool.
yeah, it was pretty cool. It was kind of this like for almost 2 weeks straight, people were kind of reliving their childhoods, from growing up on the show. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a good time. I remember it was always on TV. So I actually that was when I introduced my little brother to The Simpsons. He hadn't seen them before that. He was probably like 10 years old around then. So um, he loved it after that. He was hooked.
Oh wow, yeah, no, it was fun for us. Like I said, it was kind of this 2 week like love fest with the fans, and then they went right back to telling us when we should have canceled the show. And now it's going to outlive all of us. So
Yeah, yeah. What season is it on now? Like 30 something?
33. Yeah,
33. Wow.
I know. We used to actually talk all the time in the room about like doing a final episode. We started talking like around season 6. We started like saying, hey, we should start thinking about a finale that like in the next year or so, we're going to need a final episode because at that time, if your show ran 7 seasons, that was considered a really good run. And so we would try to think of certain ideas of like, well, what would be a good way to wrap it up? And then we wound up doing, season 7 and then 8 and 9, and we would still occasionally, don't forget, be thinking about a finale. We got to come up with something. And then we started getting close, and then we were like season 10, and then it's like, all right, we got to get serious about a final episode. you know, uh, and and at one point we were like really, and I remember at one point actually even like talking to Mac Groening, we were saying, yeah, we got to wrap this thing up, and then Fox wanted 2 more years, and we thought, all right, we'll go to season 12, but that's absolutely it. And now here we are, season 33, and there's no talk at all of a finale anymore.
Right. Maybe that's what that index card on your board meant.
So
The one that
Friday
got
night,
yelled.
yeah.
Maybe that's what maybe that's what that was about.
That would be great if somehow that wound up in the final episode, would be awesome.
Do you have a favorite Beatles album and do you have a favorite Beatle?
Oh man, I mean, I love it all for different reasons. I mean, just the excitement, that came with Meet the Beatles. I mean, you just couldn't beat it. What was so exciting is like everybody was buying these albums, the day they came out. So you were playing it at your house, then you'd go over to your friend's house and they were playing it. But it was fun that like as I was getting older, the albums were getting kind of were evolving and the getting more complicated, the musical arrangements, they were exploring different styles. And I love the fact that they to me evolved the way some bands might over a 30-year, span, they did it in 6 years. So like, every album there was just something new to discover. If I had to pick one, oh man, I mean, possibly Revolver. Yeah, it varies at different times. There's just certain things about each album I love. And, re-listening recently to Abbey Road, the medley on the second side, I never knew that the end where the guitar solo is right before Ringo does his like one and only drum solo. I play the drums, so as a kid, I was always playing that drum solo.
Oh, cool.
It's only like 20 seconds long, but I didn't realize the guitar solo in that it's John, Paul, and George all taking turns taking
Yeah,
solos. So to
so
me,
cool.
that was kind of fun because the piece it's called The End, and they were all taking solos, and it felt like they were all maybe John, Paul, and George trying to top each other on the guitar. It just sounded like they were having fun recording it. I don't know if they were, but it sounded like that to me.
I heard a story that George Martin was there in the studio during that day, and he said the three guys, John, Paul, and George, just brought in their amps, their guitars. They stood around in a circle, and they just started playing together. Just like he said, it was just like the old days in
Yeah,
Hamburg before they became big. And he said they were all smiling, and it really is great. It's such a great ending with The End.
yeah. Because now when I hear it, I get that picture in my head of the three of them, all playing like that, and just feels like a good time. Feels like they knew, they had come full circle, or that it was wrapping up. I don't know, but it was cool. And I always loved too that the stuff they did that people hadn't done at the time, like the singles, the 45 singles, that they would put out singles that weren't on the albums. Like they felt
Right.
if you put the single on the album, that it was kind of a ripoff to the fans, that the fans should get two more songs in addition to which
Yeah.
no band did that, and you listen to all those songs now, and like, oh, those all could have been number one songs on their own, and
Yeah.
and you realize, oh, they were on the same, two sides of a 45, which is incredible. And then they would do those throwaways, like the one that always made me laugh was, "You know my name, look up the number."
Oh, it's a great song.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny. John's voice, and when he does that little old English granny
Yeah.
voice, it's amazing. Yeah, those albums are great. You really can't pick a wrong choice for a favorite Beatles album. I mean, mine, I'm kind of like you, where my favorite album changes all of the time. So, Mike, what have you been up to recently? What kind of projects have you been involved in?
I just recently wrapped my 28 years on The Simpsons,
Wow.
and I've been doing. My wife and I co-created an animated show with Amy Poehler, and it's called Duncanville. And we're working on season 3 right now, and it'll be on Fox and Hulu here in the States in May, and then overseas. I know it plays in the UK, and I'm trying to remember the channel 4, maybe. I don't know. So we're working on those right now, and we got a fun season coming up. We got, speaking of great rockers who also happen to be super funny. We have Dave Grohl guest starring in an episode.
Nice.
Yeah, and
Love
he
Dave
was
Grohl.
hilarious. Yeah. Matter of fact, the last time I saw Paul McCartney play, it might have been 7 or 8 years ago at the Hollywood Bowl. And by pure coincidence, Dave Grohl happened to be sitting right behind me.
No
Uh,
way.
yeah, and he was there. I think he was there with his mom, I think.
Wow.
But yeah, and he was just, loving the show. I mean, what's not to love, man? It's Paul McCartney.
Yeah, I think I saw a video of Dave Grohl talking about the only time he's taken a picture of Paul McCartney, because he always wants to treat him as an equal, like as a friend.
Yeah.
And he said the only time he's taken a picture of him as a fan is when Paul came over to his house and was teaching his daughter how to play the piano. And Dave Grohl like walks in the room and he sees this going on, and Paul's just teaching her the notes and everything. And he's like, this is so cool. I have to take a picture of that. He's like, Paul, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to be a fan for 1 second. Paul
That's,
McCartney
I
teaching your
mean,
daughter.
that's incredible. Yeah, I think that might be in his like storyteller's book. But yeah, what I love about like McCartney and Ringo now is they seem so like at peace with who they are, that and they know their place. They know people freak out when they see them, and they just seem to handle it so well, and that they're actually able to go to places and do things that they couldn't do in their 20s. Like I've seen McCartney like sitting at a Lakers game, you know
Oh
and
wow,
he's just sitting down with the fans. He's not up in the VIP suite, or he's down low with the fans, and
that's awesome.
not courtside, but he was like 10 rows up and just sitting there. And they put him on the jumbotron. He jumps up, gives everybody a wave, and
That's awesome. Yeah, it's just really great to know that they're happy, and they're living their lives in a way where they're serving their fans even when they're in their 80s, because well they know that their music has changed a lot of people's lives. Their music has changed the world, and I think that they've come to terms with that, and I think that they're at peace with that.
Yeah, it's always fun when you see a big rock star playing like with Paul somewhere. Grohl's a great example at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They just did Get Back Together. But also there's like a concert from Hyde Park with Bruce Springsteen, and it's fun to see rock stars getting starstruck
Yeah,
and getting to jam with one of the guys that are the reason they do what they do you know
oh yeah, exactly. It's so cool. It's so
yeah.
like family tree in music. It all goes back to the Beatles, and then the Beatles have their influences too, or they get starstruck when they meet people too.
Oh yeah, you can tell when they're having fun out there. I was recently watching a clip of Paul playing "A Day in the Life," which it doesn't play live very often. But he was with Neil Young, and Neil Young was playing.
Oh wow.
I think Neil Young is playing in Hyde Park in London, and he's playing "A Day in the Life." And halfway through the song, Paul walks on the stage to
Wow.
sing like his part of the song. And I mean, the crowd goes insane when he walks out there. And it's really, if people haven't seen it, it's an incredible version of a song you would think would be impossible to play live, because there's no orchestra on the stage.
Right.
Neil Young and his band are kind of creating all the noise with feedback and stuff, but he and Paul are clearly having a great time together. And it seems like an unlikely combination, and an unlikely song, but it really works.
That's so cool. Yeah, they I guess they can make anything work. They're geniuses. It's
Yeah,
so cool.
yeah.
Mike, I have one final question for
Sure.
you, and it's a big one. It's not that big.
You need a ride to the airport.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Please drive me to LAX, please.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what's the question?
Where do you see the Beatles' music and influence in the next 10, 50, 100 years in the future? So the year, I don't know, what's 100 years from now? 2122. If we're still around.
Yes. That may be the bigger question.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I don't see it ever fading away because of the generational thing where it continues to get passed down. And I think even if kids, and actually I can use my own kids as an example. My kids they're all in their 30s now. When I first like would play the Beatles for them, they would kind of naturally resist it. I mean, I would say like when they were like about 11, 12 years old, they were starting to get into their, you know, teen years. They were heading that way. So automatically not liking anything we liked. And so they would pretend to be allergic to the Beatles. And if I had the music on in the car and the Beatles came up in the shuffle, so they would all like pretend sneezing and and they would do it just to bug me. And now, like, they all love those songs, and they're kind of blown away with the Beatles story. They now know kind of who the Beatles like were as people. They've seen, them on, talk shows, and they've just their musical education grew as they got older. And I think they will play the Beatles for their kids, like for my grandkids. And I think people just discover their song the way my mom, like I said, she got it right away. My dad just automatically hated it. And my mom had favorite Beatles songs. Like to the I mean, she passed away many years ago, but like the song Eleanor Rigby, like that would come on if I was playing it, and she would have me turn it up.
Oh
If
wow.
she'd say turn it up, and she'd listen to it, and at the end she goes, "It's the saddest song ever." And she goes, "But it's so beautiful, but it's so sad," and like
Yeah.
kind of haunted her in a great way. Like it stuck with her, and she loved this, the song something, and then when Frank Sinatra covered the song something, Frank Sinatra was her favorite singer. So, and like
Oh,
she
that's
knew where it
cool.
came from because she had heard it on my album.
Right.
And Sinatra would introduce it to his audiences saying, "This is the most beautiful song ever written," the song something. And so I think it just gets their music just gets passed around generations to, I've met people once in a while who are like, I don't know, I just never got into the Beatles. And I kind of never buy it. I just like, sometimes I think they're just being contrarians.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? They're just going to take the unpopular position,
Mhm.
for the sake of arguing it. I think the music will continue on, and be used. I think it'll continue on like in movies and TV and whatever form music takes. NFTs, I don't know like what that's gonna be
Right.
in the future, but I don't picture it ever like going away. Like, obviously people won't know every song from every album, but I think there'll always be, 20 Beatles songs that everyone knows. That's I don't know, that's my opinion anyway. So,
Oh, I completely agree with you. I think, I don't see the Beatles music going anywhere in the future. I think
you're 40 years younger than me,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
that's true.
So and here we're both sitting here talking about how much we love the Beatles. So
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't see the Beatles music going anywhere. I think that maybe they won't be listened to as much on the radio, but they're definitely going to be talked about in classrooms, just like Mozart and Bach and Beethoven. I think.
yeah, I think what's fun sometimes, like for my daughters to see, like I'll show them clips like from like the few years when they toured and the concerts, or like the Ed Sullivan show, and the girls, they're screaming and crying and fainting, like that to them seems insane, and they're right, it was. It's totally like I can't imagine reacting like that to anything.
Right. I know. You
uh,
turn on the news and it's like the world's about to end and you just kind of turn off the TV. You're like,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, because they've seen so much, they assume, all right, well, girls were told to act crazy like that, right? Like, no, it just happened.
Yeah. It's a phenomenon. It really
Yeah.
is.
It's like you have to understand it was 1964. We hadn't been excited yet. So,
Yeah.
I think also too, sometimes what gets forgotten is they came along. I mean, when they came to the States, it was like a year after JFK had been assassinated, and the country, and we were, heading, we were into like, you know, Vietnam was, starting up, but the country was just in kind of like depressed. Like the JFK assassination kind of crippled the whole country. Like nobody came out of their houses for days. I mean, we just stayed inside. Like
Mm,
families just sat in front of the TV watching the coverage of, the funeral and the procession down Pennsylvania Avenue and all that stuff. And I think they came along at a time and gave the country like this giant emotional kind of kick in the ass
Yeah.
that we needed, and kind of like freed us all to have fun again.
Yeah. People did have fun in the 60s, that's for sure.
Yes.
After everything that followed the Beatles too. They're just, a wonder of humankind, in my opinion. I think there's not only just once in a lifetime, but I feel like they're once in an existence, something like the Beatles. I don't know, can't put my finger on what it was about them really. I guess it was kind of everything, but I do feel like, like you said, it takes a certain amount of something to give an entire country that emotional kick.
Yeah, if people like haven't seen the documentary, or like going back and just watching the old clips on YouTube, and that's something you can really go down, the rabbit hole on. Just
Oh yeah.
I've seen like specials, like live footage that I didn't even know existed, like of shows that were done in the UK that had never played here before, that are now like up on YouTube where you can see them, and they're just so much fun to watch. And yeah, I mean, I've loved a million bands, but there's just something about them. I mean, even love so many bands that came right after them, like the Stones and the Who, and they're all they're great, great, great bands. And I'm a giant Springsteen fan, but there's just something completely different about the Beatles, with those four guys, and the way it all came together and what they created and left behind. I don't picture anybody ever coming close to what they did.
I completely agree. I couldn't have said it better. Mike, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is fun. I love talking music, and especially the Beatles.
Oh, by the way, I'm alive.
Thank you for listening to the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. Thank you, Mike, for coming on the show. Everybody, please go check out his new show, Duncanville. If you like the podcast, be sure to rate it and subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. We have a new guest on every week, and the podcast comes out every Wednesday morning. Be sure to subscribe and listen on your way to work, at work, on your way home, laying in bed, playing the guitar, in the shower, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'll see you next week.